begin with fundamentals, right? Let's kind of begin with this whole hybrid work thingamajig, right? The pandemic has changed the way we work. There's this great ongoing discussion about what this future work looks like. What role does the traditional office play? Will people want to come back to work? Do they need to come back to work? So let's start with that. And maybe, Bill, let me start with you. Is the office sector obsolete? Or like, what is the nature of the reset in that whole sector?
I love the obsolescence question because it brings of the question, many questions in real estate over the years, like post 9/11, there's never ever going to be another office building that rises in Lower Manhattan, right? That was post 9/11. I can give you a series of events like that, how conventional wisdom would tell you that something is dead and never coming back. That's probably, by the way, the time to invest. But let me give you the way I would think about it, or the way that the audience might think about it. So when you talk about obsolescence for the office space, for a place, imagine, if you will, a football team. The football team decides that they no longer need a stadium to practice in, right? Because in theory, you could have your football team meetings just like this on two-dimensional, Zoom, right? You could give every player, on their phone, you could download the plays that they need to study over the week, right? They could do that while they're at a Starbucks somewhere, right? In theory, like, I guess you could say they could work out in the basement every morning, right? Like work from home. That's work from home. They could train at home, right? And they could all show up on Sunday, suit up, and play to win. Never going to happen, ever. So think about your company, like a football team, that camaraderie, right? That camaraderie that is built by being face-to-face every day can only happen in an environment where you control the culture and the collaboration, right? That can't ever go away. So if you think about it, even this episode right here, which is great, by the way, but we have an audience that will have no ability to network today. You won't be able to meet Himesh. You won't be able to bump into Richard and say, hey, I heard you did that crazy deal. Or when you lost money, what'd you do? Or how do you handle it, right? That's not going to be available. So is office obsolete? Think about a football stadium, think about your football team, and think about your people that you go to war with every day in your company. And I think you got your answer.
So, Bill, follow up to that then, right? If it's not obsolete, is it changing, or are we going to go back to what we had right before the pandemic?
Massively changing. There's massive changes, and I'd say the way I would think about the changes is that there are two paradigm shifts that we have had. So we cannot ignore either paradigm shift. The first is the fact that we can now do Zoom, and that in March of 2020, the entire country was told, go home. It's going to be 2 weeks. It was like Gilligan's Island, a 3-hour tour became 2 years, right? So all of a sudden, here we are now 2 years later, 2.5 years later, right? And we're still working, we're highly functional remotely. So that will change. That will be a paradigm shift for all. So it will shift. That's the first. The second major paradigm shift is around the pandemic. Because I think what we've all learned is it's no longer a question of if there's going to be another pandemic, but when will there be the next pandemic? And I think we'll talk about that as what that means for the rest of the real estate industry.
Ed, where do you come out on the office question?
Well, I come out in a similar place to Bill. I'm a little bit less on the optimistic side economically because I see that a number of the changes are going to be quite expensive. But let me give you my feeling is that catastrophes in general serve as catalysts for social change, and they always have, because they allow people have to move out of the box to respond to them. And they change their behaviors, and they get to try out new things without the risk, without the social risk that they would otherwise have. And so I believe in the case of COVID, we saw an acceleration in the disaffection between workers and their employers over the way their lives were being structured. And I believe, I believe that this gave us the opportunity to rethink that, or to try out rethinking it. And once we tried it out, many people decided that wasn't really working for me, but I had to do it. I had no option. Now, look, I've changed the way I live, I changed the way I work, and I have an option. So I sort of see that as being an inflection point in work and other things. But I do, here's where I agree with Bill. I think that people are social beings, and they want to do collaborative work, and they want to do it in person. I'm not a believer that the days of the office are over. I do think that people are going to change the way they use office space and office time, and they're going to focus more on collaborative engagement while they're in the office and less on doing solitary work, which they can do from home in a more efficient way. And so I think that that has a lot of implications. It means that office space is going to change in form. And there are a number of ways that this is going to happen. I think more of the office space is going to be dedicated to collaborative and interactive spaces, and less, as less thinking of you having your own office and that's sort of my residence at work. I think that people are going to give up the notion of proprietary space at work. They'll come in and they'll see that as more hospitality space and interactive space. And I think that's already happening, and it started to happen before the pandemic. There was a little bit of thought during the pandemic that because of our being scared of sitting next to somebody, we were going to put up a lot of walls, et cetera, et cetera. But I think people quickly figured out that those walls aren't really going to protect them. So they're either going to be in the office or they're not. And if they're going to be in the office, they want to be there to collaborate. So I think that we're going to change the way we use space. Those changes are not going to be cheap. They're going to be expensive. We're going to have to rethink space, put a lot of money into encouraging tenants to reutilize space. It's going to change the economics of the office business for a while, but we'll transcend it. The best space, I think, is going to be reutilized, and reutilized at a higher price to the tenants, and they'll pay it because they're going to be using less of it for the same amount of employees. So they'll have less, more expensive space in the best buildings. And where the real problem is going to be, and this is the same thing that we went through in the shopping center and shopping mall business, is the middle of the market and the bottom of the market are done for. I think the middle of the office building market is going to have to be repositioned as something else or blown up. And I think, that's something else for the buildings that are physically capable will be probably multifamily or some other kind of mixed use. And I feel that the bottom of the office market is unless it has some historical, beautiful architectural thing going on, is best being turned back into carbon.